What is up, Fun Friday? Hobby with Cage, episode 253, brought to you by Bleecker Trading and Arena Club. And we'll have some fun here. I mean, last time I saw you guys, 2 days ago, we were coming off of a Yankee loss in game one. Looked like the same thing was going to happen every time that's happened since I think '03 was the last time Aaron Boone's home run. When we faced the Red Sox in the playoffs, they eliminate us. Happened recently. That happened the last time the Red Sox won the World Series. I mean, the Red Sox won the World Series in 2018 and eliminated us. They eliminated us in '04. But I told you, nothing to worry about. Yankees going to take two. Yankees took two. And we get to proceed. It has me thinking, right? I mean, it's funny. Two things happened yesterday. That's why I love this hobby, right? I come on here today, and literally I'm going to talk about stuff that just happened in the last 24 hours, right? Not just the Yankees, but what was going on with the Yankee game, me watching it, all the other games that were going on, sort of, what I was thinking hobby-wise. And also, big shout-out to Victory Investments. Sean, he take a look at his page. Part of what I'm going to talk about here today, the thought process stems from a story that he posted. And it's a lot of fun. And I think a lot of people who've been with me for a while who are more vintage leaning, because that's what I was for a very long time, might enjoy this. Well, let's get it, right? So Sean's post, Victory Investment on the stories, were basically a look back of about 20 years, maybe a little less, of some cards that you would all recognize. Vintage cards. A PSA 3 Ruth Gowdy yellow back number 53, 61 Fleer Wilt Chamberlain. I think he did like a PSA 5 or 6. A Jackie Robinson card from the 50s in mid-grade. There was a 1915 Cracker Jack Ty Cobb. Different price ranges for these things. A couple of them went from a few $100s to, I think the Cobb now is like a $20,000 card. And, the Ruth is between 10 and 20. And basically the look back to like 2005-ish, 20 years ago. Some of them 18 years. You go back and get actual sales of these. And obviously vintage is difficult because of the eye appeal. But when you go down to this level, it kind of all flattens out. But basically the look was, had you bought this card, what would your return be over time? You know what I mean? Almost looking at it like an investment, right? Yeah, you love the card, you love, having the card. It's a cool thing. But we've had this conversation about, investor versus collector and people who want to hold the cards and own the cards. And I think what he was trying to say, and if this isn't it, and it's just what I took from it, that's good enough. There's a middle ground, sort of like a blurred line between the investor collector. What folks are trying to say is you need people to hold the cards, right? You need people who want to actually own the card itself, sort of like owning a stock, right? And holding it rather than trading it, right? It happens in other assets, right? I mean, you watch Mad Money, Jim Cramer, he says the same thing. This is not a stock you trade. This is a stock you own. Or this is not a stock you own, you trade this. You get in it, and then you get out of it. Okay. So the point that was made with these vintage cards, or these older cards, these known commodities, was that there was a legitimate investment. In most instances over 20 years, these cards had gone anywhere between 12 and 18x of their value. You know what I mean? A card that was $1,000 went to $15,000. And, one card that was like, 80 or 90 bucks, went to, $1,500 and it was 20x. And, the thought was, all right, well, if you were able to amass 20 of these 20 years ago and invest X, your investment has gone up 15 times, which, you compare it to the stock market, you can compare it to other investments, and it's cool that you get to own the card. Now, owning the card itself has to be some of the value, right? Because, these cards are not spinning off a dividend. It's not like buying Coke or, Pepsi stock, where, you hold the stock and you hope that it goes up in value, but it's also, as you hold it, it's paying you, stock dividends. You don't get that with cards. But I like what he was trying to say. It was sort of like you can be rewarded for holding a card, for holding this item that you want to hang on to. You just, you don't recognize that until you sell it. You know what I mean? But the same thing with stocks, right? It's like paper gains. And the thought was, you don't really have to get too crazy, right? You buy the card that everybody knows is the card. You buy a card that's recognizable. You buy a card that, that's of a person, and you don't have to get the highest grade. Like none of these were like PSA 10s. It wasn't a PSA 8 Ruth. It wasn't a $100,000 card. You could still invest $100,000 just buying in at those lower to mid grades if you bought enough of them. It was an interesting thought process. And why am I bringing it up and wasting my 5 minutes of hobby thoughts with it? Because last night I watched baseball games. It's a great thing, right? And it started having me think about the hobby and whether that's fun or whether it's not fun and diversifying a portfolio and et cetera, right? You don't just have to do that, because what I have found is some of the excitement around the hobby has nothing to do with the vintage cards. Like you're not discovering or learning anything by going out there and buying a vintage baseball card. You're just not, unless you've never bought them before. But like I know all about the 33 Gaudy set. You know what I mean? I know which one's the rarest ones. I know which one's in high grades. I know which one I like. I know which one's favored by the hobby. I know the difference between a 14 and a 15 Cracker Jack. And I mean, like these things have been researched to death. There's no real hunt for it. If I wanted to buy a mid-grade 33 Gaudy Ruth, I would just have to log into whatever auction sites are running auctions this week or this month, and I'm going to find one. And if not, I can find one. It's not that hard to find. These are not rare cards. So the hunt is not there, that research, that excitement, that trying to unearth something that's new or unknown or, a hidden gem in the market. You're not getting that with any of these, and that's not the point, right? It's sort of like, buying something and holding it forever, like, buying Coca-Cola stock, or like I said, Pepsi stock, or buying, a stock that's just one of these kind of like slow, like my Verizon stock that I talk about all the time, right? Right. So what's funny about it is I watched the games yesterday and I thought to myself, all right, well, every time Judge gets up, I'm like, all right, you got to get a home run. My cards are depending on it, and you see, anyone can create a hero here. I'm a Yankee fan, so I knew who Cam Schlittler was. I watched his starts. I bought some of his cards this year, and it's a pretty crazy road I went down after he had his first couple good starts about what rookies he has and doesn't have and what cards of his are out there. And you got to be careful with what cards of his are available. I could do a whole nother episode about him because he doesn't really have the cards that most people buy yet. They will come. But, it sort of happened with Ben Rice last year for the Yankees too, when Ben Rice came out and kind of showed up and all he had were Topps Now cards. And you're like, what the heck? Do I buy these? I guess you can, but you better be ready to sell them quick. But it's funny. You start thinking about the performance on the field impacting it, because you extrapolate that and compare it to, Sean's analysis of these cards. They're not going to bounce like this. Nothing crazy is going to happen because Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb and Will Chamberlain are not playing in the playoffs on TV for you, right? But they're also not going to, tank. They're also not going to, mess up and go 0 for a series and, tarnish their legacy. That's why you have this kind of like slow and steady kind of thing. But I love the excitement of, having an investment in a player. Like, I bought a very big Julio Rodriguez card this year. And I hope for him to have some success in the playoffs. And, as long as it's not against the Yankees. But it's a fun thing. And it had me thinking, because one of the things that Sean posted was Mac Jones. And it was like, you had lost 91 cents on a dollar. Like your investment in Mac Jones was worth, 9 cents of the dollar. It had gone down 91%, let's say. But he was playing. He's playing and he actually is playing against the Rams last night on TV and he, filling in for Brock Purdy. And, you could have a resurrection in your career, not just Mac Jones, but if you want to keep up with the Hoppy Joneses, buying a Ruth Gowdy is not the only way to, to kind of, invest. There are riskier investments. There are beaten down stocks that have, potential for redemption. Just look at Daniel Jones' stuff. That guy was, left for dead in New York. Here's a guy who, you couldn't give his cards away. He was a laughing stock. He got tackled by the turf. They were, they couldn't get rid of him fast enough. And yet, look what he's done so far in Indianapolis. I mean, he's got a cool nickname to boot, really, Indiana Jones, right? I mean, come on now. I mean, there was after week 3, there's, MVP talk around this guy. So it had me thinking, you don't have to do one or the other. You don't have to be an investor, or you don't have to be a flipper. You don't have to be a vintage guy. You don't have to be a modern guy. You could have a bunch of it all in your portfolio, which I'm sure, by the way, is what, Edward Jones Investments would tell you. It doesn't all have to be Wondershine Index. You can mix in a little bit of fun with it and then root for your guy. You know what I mean? You can root for your guy, and you can, it adds a level of excitement to it that, for me, makes it fun. Makes it a little nerve-wracking, but makes it fun. I'm not a sports bettor. I'm a person who knows myself well enough to know that if I start getting into the sports betting, I just won't get out of it. It'll just be, keep betting, that would take over my life. So if you know yourself that way, just don't start, right? But the cards allow me to kind of have some sort of a vested interest in it. If, you're picking a guy, right? This is my guy. He's going to do well, and I'm going to buy a card of him and watch him, watch him do well. I did make a play earlier, before football season started. I thought Nico Collins would have a good year this year. And, he hasn't really lived up to what I thought he was going to, but, it's a long season. I watched his games and stat lines. I picked him a little earlier in fantasy than I probably should have. It hasn't materialized, but that's fun, right? It's like, this is my guy. I'm going to pick a guy. I'm going to put my money where my mouth is by buying his cards. And look, if you bought Daniel Jones cards, you were down for years. You have a chance to come back. You have a chance this year to make it all back in a hurry, one of these spikes. It's an interesting thing to look at. Not a lot of people look at this way. It's just what was on my brain, watching Mac Jones, quarterback yesterday, and watching, baseball, and watching, this Cam Schlittler come out of nowhere, come out of Massachusetts, actually, one of the New England's own, knocking his team out of the playoffs. It was just a fun kind of. I enjoyed the content that Victory put out about sort of like a long-term investment, a slow and steady. But at the same time, I'm watching playoff games yesterday. If you're a Tatis guy, he didn't really show up in the playoffs, but you were watching and hoping that he showed up and had a better series. You watched that, Ohtani came out there and basically hit 2 home runs. He hit a home run to lead the game off and just, all right, this is what he's going to do, And now maybe he pitches. Maybe he's a game 1 starter in the next series. And maybe he hits all. You're able to watch, things get added to your guy's trophy case and add to your, the value of your cards as it goes. You don't get that with some of the other stuff. And by the way, it's okay to not get it because you also don't have the downside. You don't have, the injury risk or the failure risk. I mean, if you're an Aaron Judge guy like myself, the playoffs come and you're like, all right, is this the playoffs where he's going to, the monkey comes off the back and, he's going to be more clutch in the playoffs? Well, what if he doesn't? You have this guy who probably is going to win his 3rd MVP after having a crazy season again. But if he stinks it up in the playoffs again, especially here in New York, that's what everybody remembers. What does that do to your cards? So I was watching the games and thinking about all this, and I'm thinking I can't wait to wake up and do an episode on this, just because some of the best received episodes that I have, a few in the last 3 or 4 that I've done. I got some really great comments from people, some really great DMs on Instagram telling me that they really felt what I was saying here, or they really like this episode. I don't know whether or not this one hits with you, but it's where my brain is now. My PC is more spread out than it has been previously. I have a nice combination of GOATs and current active players. And for me, that's a cool mix, right? It's a cool mix of some action while the games are being played, but also some real steady, fun stuff where, the legacy of somebody like Tom Brady is already, cemented where it needs to be. And I don't have to worry that he's going to come out and get knocked out of the playoffs in round 1 or won't make the playoffs. It's not going to impact his card. But for the other stuff, I enjoy having that. It's sort of like a little bit of risk and a little bit of excitement that you get from cards. So anyway, that's it. I try to do 5 minutes, and this is like 15. I'll do some more episodes. I got like 500 things to talk about with you guys, and this one wasn't even a planned one. It's just where my brain was last night while watching the games. I mean, you talk about an awesome time for the hobby, right? The NBA is starting back up in the next couple of weeks. You got preseason games. Last night there were 3 playoff baseball games and an NFL game. If you're a golf guy, you just had some cool golf, the Ryder Cup. And there's just, it is a great time for sports. It's getting a little colder here in the Northeast, a little cold waking up this morning. And layer on top of that, I'm pretty sure a couple hours after I record this, the presale opens for Topps licensed basketball for the first time in a long time. And that's cool too, right? So you got the sports, you got the hobby, you got all kinds of stuff going on. I'm not going to go tell you to buy Disney cards. This is not what you tune in for. Although I guess there are some people who like that. To each their own. And that is another episode of The Hobby with Cage. 253 of these solos. That's pretty crazy. And you guys have been here for all of them, I'm sure. So thank you for that. Like I say all the time, if it wasn't for you, I'd just be talking to myself. And that would be weird. Thank you, Arena. Thank you, Bleecker. You guys are great sponsors. Talk to you soon. Take care, everybody.